history when a single human being rises, not with a weapon, not with an army, not with fear, but with nothing more than the truth, faith, and the quiet power of a determined heart. And when such a soul appears, the world shifts forever. Before he was called Mahatma, before the world whispered his name with reverence, Mohandas Gandhi was simply a young man searching for his place, wrestling with doubt, injustice, and the weight of his own transformation. He walked through humiliation, through exile, through silence, through fire, and with every step he carved a new path for humanity, a path where courage was gentle, where resistance was peaceful, and where victory came not from domination, but from dignity. This is not just the story of a leader. This is the story of a man who turned suffering into strength, weakness into wisdom, and truth into a revolution. Let us journey through the life of a soul who taught the world that freedom begins within, that history can be rewritten not by force, but by conscience, and that the smallest voice, when aligned with justice, can echo louder than empires. This is the story of Mahatma Gandhi. I'm Hypnos, and like every quiet night, I have a story to share. You may subscribe for the nights ahead. Close your eyes and picture the edge of the sea. The waves come in and they go out, like slow breathing. Fishing boats rest on the sand. The morning air is cool. Smoke rises in thin lines from small kitchens. In the lanes of a seaside town, oil lamps are going out, one by one, and roasters begin to call. This town is Porbandar, on the western coast of India. Long ago, its streets were narrow and bright. Houses were made of stone and wood. Courtyards held neem trees and small wells. Markets smelled of spices, jaggery, and fresh limes. If you walked through Porbandar at dawn, you would hear metal pots tapping, women sweeping doorsteps, and the soft voices of prayer. In a modest house here, a child was born. His family named him Mohandas. Later, the world would call him Gandhi. But in the beginning, he was simply a boy in a busy home, with a father who believed in duty and a mother who lived by faith. His father, Karamchand, worked as a diwan, a kind of chief minister in local court. People trusted him. They said he was strict but fair. He did not like lies, and he did not bend rules to please the powerful. He wore simple clothes and walked with calm steps. When he left for work, the house felt a little quieter, as if the walls respected his routine. His mother, Putlibai, loved simple things done with care. She kept fast on sacred days. She prayed at dawn and at dusk. She spoke gently, but when she made a promise, she kept it. Mohandas watched her fingers move across prayer beads. He watched how she paused before she spoke, as if she tasted her words first. From her, he learned that a steady heart can carry a heavy day. The house itself was plain, The floors were cool stone. The windows opened to the street. The kitchen held clay pots and iron pans. Meals were simple: rice, dal, vegetables, roti, puffed on a hot griddle. Sometimes there was sweet made from milk and sugar. The family ate sitting on the floor, together after the meal. Someone swept, someone washed, someone folded cloths and stacked plates. The work had a rhythm. The rhythm made the house feel safe. Mohandas was a shy child. He spoke in a low voice. He kept his eyes down in front of strangers. He was not the first to shout an answer in class. He did not push to the front in the games. He liked to watch. He liked to think before he moved. Some children are like bright drums. He was more like a quiet flute, soft but clear. Porbandar taught him many small lessons. At the market, he saw silk next to empty bowels. He saw laughter and worry sitting side by side. At the temple, he heard bells and chanting. Outside the temple, he saw a monkey steal fruit and ran. He noticed how the world held both a kindness and trouble in the same hand. He went to school along a path of dust and shadows. The classroom had wooden benches and a blackboard. The teacher's stick tapped the floor when the room grew noisy. Mohandas wrote carefully, each letter neat. His sums were correct more often than they were fast. When he did not know an answer, his cheeks warmed, and he wished the question would move on. He did not like to be watched. He wanted to be ready. At home, he copied his lessons by lamplight. The flame made a small circle on the page. His mother's prayers filled the room like soft rain. In the next room, his father read papers from the court. A younger sibling asked for water. Someone laughed at a small joke. A house has its own song, and this one sang of duty and devotion. Sometimes Mohandas walked to the shore. He stood where the sand grew firm under the water's edge. He watched the line where sea and sky touched. The horizon felt like a promise he could not yet name. He picked up smooth stones and slipped them into his pocket. He listened to fishermen talk about wind and current, and what the sea allows and what it refuses. He learned small courtesies. He learned to greet elders with joined hands. He learned to share the last piece of roti. He learned to sit, to listen, to wait. These skills seem simple, but they make a shape inside a person. They teach the mind to be patient. They teach the heart to make room. He also felt fear. He feared the dark when the lamp went out. He feared the teacher's sharp voice on a bad day. He feared the anger of other boys. Fear is part of childhood, like shadow is part of light. He carried it and he kept walking. One day, a small thing happened that later felt big. In class, the inspector visited. The teacher paced. A spelling test began. Mohandas wrote his words with care. He made a mistake. The teacher stood behind him and tapped his shoulder. "Look at your neighbor's slate," teacher whispered, pointing with his eyes. Mohandas kept his gaze on his own slate. The inspector left. The teacher sighed. Mohandas went home with a tight feeling in his chest, unsure if he had done right by refusing to copy, or wrong by making a mistake. That night, his mother's hand rested on his head as she passed. He felt the knot loosen. "Truth is not always easy," he would later say, "but it's always light." He saw sickness too, when a relative fell ill. The house moved into a slower rhythm. Work paused. Quiet footsteps replaced chatter. His mother kept fast and prayed for health. He learned that bodies are fragile and care is a kind of work. He learned to sit still beside someone who suffered, to listen without needing to speak. His father's honesty left a deep mark. Once, a wealthy man asked for a favor that would bend a rule for personal gain. Karmashan refused. The man frowned and left. Money did not change the answer. Duty, his father said, is not a thing you wear only when it fits the day. Mohandas stored that sentence like a seed in his mind. There were festivals. On certain nights, the street filled with lamps. On others, colorful powders dusted the air. Drums beat, children ran. Women sang as they drew rangoli at their doors. Mohandas watched more than he danced. Still, the joy reached him. He liked the way color stayed on the fingers, even after washing. He liked the smell of sweet, fried in ghee and dipped in syrup. Sometimes a holy man came to the neighborhood. He spoke about truth and kindness. He told stories of kings who gave away gold and of saints who walked barefoot for miles. Mohandas listened without moving. He felt the stories land somewhere inside him, like small boats finding a shore. He loved his mother deeply. Her fasting worried him. He asked if she was hungry. She smiled and said some hungers teach the body to be gentle. He did not yet understand, but he kept the smile with him. As he grew a little older, he watched his father's temper. It wasn't wild, but it was sharp. When men lied in the court, Karashman's eyes hardened. When he felt cheated, his jaw set. Mohandas learned that the truth was not only in words. It was in the face and the hands and the voice. He also learned that anger, even when it stands with truth, must be guided like a strong ox. If you do not hold the rope, it will pull you where you did not mean to go. In the lanes, he saw men from different castes keep their distance. He felt the invisible lines that separated people who lived side by side. He did not have the power to change it. He did not have the language to name it. But he knew the lines there were there, and he did not like them. At night, he sometimes lay awake and listened to the town. A dog barked, a cart rolled by. The sea spoke in its sleep. He wondered about the world beyond Popanda. He wondered how big the map was. He wondered if he would one day step beyond the edge of the page he knew. When he was still young, a marriage was arranged. This was the custom. The girl's name was Kasturba. She was close to his age. The families agreed. The house became busy with preparations. Cloth being measured, sweets being made, messages carried. Mohandas felt shy and confused. He did not understand marriage. He did not understand how children could become a pair. He felt pulled by tradition and by the small voice that asked questions he did not know how to say aloud. The wedding day was bright. Musicians played, people laughed. The two children sat side by side, dressed in fine clothes that felt heavy. They traded shy glances. They did as they were told. Later, when the music softened and the guests went home, Mohandas looked at the door of the room he now shared and felt the weight of a future he could not yet see. Some paths begin before our feet are ready. In the months that followed, he tried to be a good husband in the way a boy understands goodness. Bring water, share bread, keep promises made by elders. He was clumsy and sometimes proud. He wanted attention. He wanted his way. He did not yet know that love is not a hand that takes, but a hand that opens. He would learn this slowly and often the hard way. School went on, duties at home went on. The sea kept breathing in and out. Popanda taught him patience, and his parent taught him shape the more lessons waited. One day, Mohandas made a mistake that burned in his memory. He took a small piece of gold from his brother's armlet and sold it to pay a debt. Shame followed him like a shadow. He could not meet his father's eyes. He wrote a note confessing what he had done, placed it in his father's hand. Karam Chand read it. He did not shout. He did not strike. He sat back, closed his eyes, and tears slid down his cheeks. Mohandas felt the ground tilt. The gentleness of that moment cut more deeply than any harsh word. He learned that truth told with courage can break a hard knot. He learned that forgiveness can make a boy want to be worthy. Another lesson came from food. Some boys whispered that eating meat made a person strong. They said meat gave courage. Mohandas was raised in a home that did not eat meat. He was curious. He tried it in secret once or twice, and then he felt sick, not in his stomach, but in his heart. He decided that strength is not only in the body, it's also in the will. He chose to stop. He chose to keep faith with the house that fed him. Years passed quickly, in memory but slowly in a child's feet. Mohandas moved from class to class, from lane to lane, from one small duty to another. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a leader. He was a boy learning how to hold himself upright in a world that leaned. He watched how people spoke to servant. He watched how merchant weighed gain. He watched how a lie made in the morning needed 3 more by evening to keep it standing. He did not like this. He wanted simple lines that did not wiggle when you looked at them. He wanted a word to mean what it said. On certain afternoons, his mother told him stories from old text. There were kings who threw away crowns, sages who sat under trees, and travelers who found answers where they did not expect them. She told him that truth has many names in many tongues, but it feels the same in every heart. He listened. He did not argue. He tagged the stories into the same pocket where he kept smooth stones from the shore. When storms came, the house windows were shuttered, and the family sat close together. The rain hit the roof like marching feet. The sea roared. In the safe darkness, Mohandas felt small, and at the same time, he felt part of something large. Later, he would remember this when the world around him shook in other ways. Hold close to the people near you and let the storm spend itself. As he grew, the town grew smaller, not because it changed, but because he did. He learned its patterns so well that his eyes began to look past them. He felt a pull towards something beyond the horizon. He did not have a plan. He had a feeling. Feelings can be maps when no paper map is at hand. Banda kept giving him small duties. Carry this message. Fetch water. Help an elder cross the street. These tasks were not grand. They were threads, woven together. They taught him to serve. Service, he learned, is not a big word. It's a small action done again and again. He began to see that the world did not need louder people. It needed steadier ones. He practiced being steady. He failed many times. He tried again. Trying again is a kind of prayer. When he left childhood behind, he did not leave Banda. He carried it with him. The taste of simple food, the feel of stone floors, the sound of his mother's beads, the look on his father's face when truth hurt and healed at the same time. These were not just memories, they were tools. They would shape his hand when he reached for larger work. And so, in a town of tide and trade, among ordinary houses and everyday duties, the quiet boy learned patience, truth, and care. He did not yet know where these lessons would take him, but the sea had already taught him something important. Keep returning, keep returning, keep returning, until even the hardest rock becomes smooth. When Mohandas was still only a boy, his life was carried along by customs older than himself. In his culture, marriages were often arranged when children were young. And so, before he could fully understand what marriage meant, he was joined to a girl close to his age, Kasturba. She, too, was still a child, learning her way through the world. Their marriage was not the meeting of two mature people, but the tying of two families by tradition and promise. The days leading up to the wedding filled the Gandhi home with activity. Women ground spices and prepared sweet, whose smell spread into the street. Sari cloths were dyed, stitched, and folded with care. Brass vessels were polished until they gleamed. Relatives arrived from nearby towns, their voices filling the courtyard. Mohandas watched with wide eyes, shy and silent. To him, it felt more like a festival than a personal event. He was both curious and uneasy. On the wedding day, drums beat through the narrow lanes. The sound of conch shells joined in, echoing between the stone houses. Children ran alongside the procession, eager for sweet, tagging at elders' hands. Mohandas and Kasturba sat side by side, their small shoulders draped in heavy cloth. Flowers hung around their necks. They did not fully know the meaning of the words they repeated, nor the weight of the vows spoken for them. They were shy, glancing at one another, glancing away, doing as they were guided. At the end of it, they were husband and wife. The music played on, but Mohandas felt quiet inside, aware that his life had shifted in a way he could not yet grasp. The first months of their marriage were filled with learning. There were two children expected to play roles they did not understand. Mohandas sometimes struggled with his temper. He admitted later that he wanted more than he gave, that he demanded attention, that patience was not yet his gift. He argued with Kasturba, expecting her to follow his will. She resisted, often standing firm, which only puzzled him further. Yet, as days passed into months, small routines grew between them. They ate meals together, fetched water together, shared small duties. Quarrels softened, laughter sometimes returned. Slowly, the bond between them began to take shape. School life continued alongside marriage. Mohandas walked dusty roads to a classroom of wooden benches and chalk dust. He was not brilliant, but he was careful. His letters were neat, his sums correct, though slow. Teachers sometimes scolded him for his shyness, for speaking too softly, but they noted his discipline. He disliked shortcuts, preferred to work steadily, even if it made him stand apart. When inspectors visited and teachers urged boys to copy answers, Mohandas kept his slate to himself. Mistakes were his own, and he carried them without shame. Adolescence brought temptations. Friends whispered that eating meat would make a boy strong, bold, and fearless. Mohandas had been raised in a vegetarian home. Still, curiosity pulled at him. He tried meat in secret once or twice. The taste was not what unsettled him. It was the secrecy, the break from his mother's teaching. His stomach twisted with guilt. He decided strength was not found in what one ate, but in the will to stay true to one's beliefs. He gave it up, and the lesson stayed with him. Other temptations came too. He once took a piece of gold from his brother's ornaments to pay a small debt. The act burned inside him. Unable to carry the weight, he confessed in a note to his father. Laying the truth bare, his father read silently, then closed his eyes. No harsh words came, no hand struck. Tears rolled down his face instead. That quiet forgiveness pierced Mohandas more deeply than anger ever could. He felt the power of truth, and the call to honesty became a pillar in his life. These years were full of such small tests, the testing of honesty, of self-control, of humility. Each mistake pressed him, and each correction shaped him. He was not yet the Gandhi who would move nations, but he was already being curved into someone who looked for light in difficult places. At home, Kasturba remained his partner, learning beside him. Sometimes they quarreled, sometimes they laughed, sometimes they simply carried out the daily routines that held the household together. Mohandas slowly began to see that her patience was a strength, that her resistance was not defiance, but balance. The marriage that had begun as a duty was slowly becoming a companionship, fragile but real. Life in Popanda continued to teach him. He noticed the unfairness between castes, though he could not yet challenge it. He saw servants treated harshly, why wealth excused lies. He did not have words for reform, but he felt discomfort in his heart. In small ways, he tried to shape himself differently, by treating others gently, by resisting the easy road of dishonesty. Festivals filled the town with color. Drums beat through the night. Powders of red and yellow clouded the air. Children shouted, elders sang. Mohandas joined quietly, more a watcher than a dancer. Still, he loved the way joy lingered even after the festival ended. How colors stained fingers, how stories were retold for weeks. These bright moments gave balance to the stricter lessons of his home. By his late teens, Mohandas had grown into a boy with questions. He wasn't bold, not yet elite. He was thoughtful, shy, careful with his words. He carried the lessons of his father's honesty, his mother's faith, his wife's quiet strength, and his own small mistakes. He did not know it yet, but these were the stones that would pave his path forward. The sea of Papanda kept breathing its rhythm in and out, as if marking time for him. Beyond that horizon, new worlds waited. Soon, Mohandas would leave his town, carrying with him the quiet lessons of marriage, adolescence, and conscience, stepping onto a path that would stretch far beyond the shores of his childhood home. When Mohandas reached the age of 18, his family decided it was time for him to take a step that very few from their town had ever taken. He would travel to England to study law. It wasn't an easy decision. Tradition pressed against it. Some elders in the community warned that crossing the seas would break the purity of caste. They said that those who left would never return the same. But Mohandas felt the pull of the horizon he had watched since boyhood. Beyond Pobanda, beyond Rajkot, where he later lived, there was a larger world waiting, and he was curious to see it. The days before his departure were heavy with preparation. Trunks were packed with a few sets of clothes, simple books, and letters of introduction. His mother, worried that the world outside would tempt him, made him swear solemn vows before he left. He promised her he would not touch wine, that he would not eat meat, that he would keep away from women. These promises were threats she tied to his heart, reminders that even far from home, her voice would follow him. Mohandas accepted them seriously. He wanted her trust more than he wanted freedom. The voyage by ship was long and new. The sea spread in every direction, endless, restless, alive. On deck, passengers walked for air, speaking in tongues he barely understood. Meals were served in ways strange to him. He kept to his vegetarian diet with difficulty, sometimes eating only bread and fruit. The salt wind stung his face, the sun burned his skin, but he endured. He spent hours in quiet corners, reading, watching the water change color with the sky. The days blended into one another. The boy who had walked dusty lanes now stared at horizons that rolled and shifted with the waves. When at last England came into view, it was like entering another world. London was vast, noisy, and grey with smoke. Carriages rattled on cobblestones. Gas lamps glowed in foggy streets. Men in tall hats and women in layered dresses harried about. Mohandas felt small in this city of iron and stone. The buildings rose higher than he had ever seen. The language pressed on his ears, crisp and fast. He clutched his luggage, uncertain but determined. He enrolled at the inner temple, one of the 4 inns of court, to study law. His days were filled with lectures, books, and endless pages of legal codes. He was not quick at first. The English system felt cold, filled with strange words and customs. He sat quietly in classes, writing carefully, working to understand. When others laughed or mocked, he bent his head lower and studied harder. His nature remained shy, but his will was steady. Outside the classroom, he struggled. His clothes were Indian, simple, and he felt out of place among the polished coat and ties of his classmates. Once, he bought a suit in hope of fitting in, but the tailor cut it poorly, and he felt more awkward than before. He learned slowly how to knot a tie, how to wear gloves, how to use a fork and knife properly. These were not laws of the court, but laws of society, and he studied them with the same discipline he gave his books. Loneliness followed him. The foggy street, the cold rooms, the distance from family, it pressed on him. But he found small anchors. He discovered a vegetarian society in London and joined it. There he met others who shared his diet, and in their company he felt less alone. The group gave him books not only about food, but about philosophy and religion. He read texts from different faiths, from different lands, and his mind began to open wider. He saw that truth had many paths, and that wisdom spoke in many voices. His evenings were often quiet. He read novels and scriptures. He wrote letters home. He practiced his English. He walked the street, listening to the clatter of horses, the cries of vendors, the songs drifting from pubs. Sometimes he went to the theater, curious about the stage, though he did not always understand the humor. More often, he sat with a book, turning pages slowly, thinking about what lay beneath the words. He also practiced discipline in small things. He tried to keep his body neat, his habit orderly. He was careful with money, often walking instead of taking a carriage, often eating plain meals instead of rich ones. He lived simply, holding to the promises he had made to his mother. Temptations existed, but he did not bend. His word was a shield, and he held it close. The study of law was not easy, but step by step he made progress. He learned to argue a point, to reason through a case, to see both sides before choosing one. He sat for examinations, nervous but steady. The work was dry at times, but he felt its importance. The law, he realized, was not only about courts and judges. It was about order, about fairness, about the lines that shape how people live together. This thought stayed with him. During these years, he grew not only in knowledge but in confidence. He remained shy in large gatherings, but he learned how to stand straighter, how to meet the eyes of others, how to speak with more clarity. He was still gentle, still careful, but less hidden. He began to see that even a quiet voice can carry if it speaks the truth. After 3 years of study, Mohandas completed his training and was called to the bar. He had achieved what he set out to do. he had become a barrister, a man of law. For his family in India, it was a great honor. For him, it was a door now open, though he did not yet know what awaited beyond it. He packed his books, his certificate, his few belongings. He said farewell to London, the fog, the bells, the endless grey street, and boarded the ship for home. The sea stretched before him once again, and he felt the weight of all he had learned. He had left as a boy tied by promises, shy and uncertain. He returned as a man who had faced loneliness, discipline, and discovery. England had given him knowledge of law, but also a wider view of faith, culture, and the ways of the world. When Pobanda and Rajkot welcomed him back, the street looked the same, but he was not the same. His eyes carried new questions, his hands carried new skills, and his heart carried a quieter readiness. Ahead of him lay challenges he could not yet imagine, but already the foundation was set. The young man who stepped ashore had walked through fog and found his way in by holding to promises, by keeping faith, and by learning that truth, like light, could be found in many places. This return was not an ending, it was the beginning of another path, one that would soon take him far from India again, to South Africa, where new lessons waited and where his voice would begin to rise. When Mohandas returned to India as a newly trained barrister, he hoped to begin his career in law. He carried his certificate, his books, his experience from London, and a quiet confidence that he had grown. But his first steps into practice were difficult. In the courts of Bombay, his voice was soft, his manner hesitant. He struggled to speak with authority before judges and crowded rooms. His cases faltered and clients turned elsewhere. The man who had endured London's fog now faced the weight of his own shyness. An opportunity came when a firm offered him work in South Africa. It was meant to be a year-long assignment, assisting in a legal case for an Indian merchant. The journey would give him new experience, new horizons. In 1893, he boarded a ship bound once more across the seas, this time to the southern tip of Africa. He carried little more than a briefcase, his promises, and the hope that this post would steady his career. When he arrived in Durban, he saw a land of contrast. The port bustled with ships and wagons, with traders shouting, with workers moving goods under the hot sun. But beyond the commerce lay a society divided by sharp lines of race. Europeans held power, natives and immigrants lived under restriction and suspicion. Mohandas, an Indian, stepped into a place where his skin marked him as lesser. The shock came quickly. On a train journey to Pretoria, he boarded a first-class compartment, holding a valid ticket. A white passenger objected. The conductor demanded that he move to third class. Gandhi refused, insisting that he had paid for his place. He was thrown out of the carriage at Pietersburg station, left shivering in cold night with his luggage on the platform. That night, sitting alone, he felt anger, shame, and confusion. But alongside them, something else stirred, resolve. He asked himself if he should return home or stay and resist. He chose to stay. He chose to resist with dignity. other incident followed. In court, he was asked to remove his turban and refused. On the street, he was pushed, insulted, denied lodging. At every turn, he saw the injustice faced by Indians in South Africa. Traders harassed, laborers beaten, families taxed unfairly, marriages unrecognized by law. The humiliation he felt became a window into the suffering of many. His personal wounds joined with the wounds of a community. Gandhi's rule as a lawyer began to grow wider. He helped draft petitions, wrote letters to newspapers, organized meetings. He spoke softly, but his words carried sincerity. People listened. He urged them not to fight violence with violence, but to hold fast to truth and to resist injustice with patience. In these years, he began to shape the principle he would later name Satyagraha, truth force. It was not mere protest. It was the idea that the power of truth and non-violent resistance could ban injustice without breaking the spirit. He stayed longer than planned. 1 year stretched into many. His wife, Kasturba, and their children joined him in South Africa. Together, they lived through hardship and new beginnings. Gandhi built communities of support where Indians worked together, shared resources, and learned to stand with dignity. He encouraged education, teaching children not only to read and write, but to live simply and honestly. He himself dressed more plainly, choosing Indian cloth over Western suit. He began to live in the way he taught, modest, disciplined, grounded, in service. Campaigns grew when the government imposed unfair taxes on Indians. Gandhi helped organize resistance. People marched. People refused to register under unjust laws. People accepted arrest rather than submit. Prisons filled, but spirits did not break. Gandhi himself was jailed more than once. Behind bars, he read, wrote, and strengthened his resolve. He learned that suffering could be endured when it carried purpose, and that chains could be lighter than lies. Not all agreed with him. Some wanted sharper action, quicker result. Some felt non-violence was too slow, too gentle. But Gandhi held firm. He said that the means were as important as the ends. To fight injustice with injustice, to fight hate with hate, would only plant the same seeds again. He wanted a harvest of truth, and so he planted truth. South Africa became his training ground. The boy who had once trembled in Bombay courts grew into a leader who could stand before crowds and speak with calm strength. The timid student became a figure who wrote articles read across continent. His small act of resistance lit fires in others. Communities that once stood scattered began to see themselves as united. Through these years, Gandhi learned practical lessons as well. He learned to negotiate with officials, to organize funds, to print newspapers, to coordinate marches. He saw how discipline could make a crowd strong, how patience could outlast power. He discovered that leadership was not about command, but about service. Walking in front when needed, walking beside when possible, walking behind when others had to lead. Life was not only politics. At home, he and his wife raised their children. She often bore the weight of daily hardships, scarce money, crowded houses, the strain of her husband's absences. Their relationship was tested, but endured. Gandhi, too, struggled to balance family and cause. He wrote about his failures, about the times he demanded too much, about the mistakes he made. Honesty about his own flaws became part of his strength. In South Africa, Gandhi began to shape himself into the man history would know. He had left India as a shy barrister. Here, through humiliation and resistance, through prison and petition, through marches and meetings, he became something more. He became a leader, not through power, but through truth. By the time he prepared to return to India, he was no longer only Mohandas Gandhi, lawyer. He was Bapu to some, leader to others, a man who had discovered that non-violence was not weakness, but a force stronger than iron. The lessons of South Africa would not stay in South Africa. They would travel back with him, carried in his hands, ready to be planted in Indian soil. And so, from the platform of Pietersburg, where he had once been thrown into the cold night, to the crowded halls where he held communities in defiance of injustice, Gandhi gathered the tools that would shape a nation's struggle. His journey in South Africa but his larger journey was only beginning. When Gandhi finally returned to India in 1915, he was no longer only the shy barrister who had once trembled in Bombay's court. South Africa had changed him. It had given him voice. It had given him method. It had given him the experience of leading people in the face of injustice. He came back to India carrying not riches or trophies, but lessons. Truth must be lived. Non-violence can be power, and leadership is service. The ship brought him to Bombay, where crowds awaited. They had read of his campaigns overseas. They had heard of the man who had led Indians in South Africa with courage and without weapons. To them, he was a figure of promise. To Gandhi himself, the welcome was humbling. He still felt like a learner, a servant. He wanted to understand his country again before he tried to guide it. India was vast, complicated, wounded under British rule. Taxes pressed heavily on farmers. Salt, a basic need, was taxed cruelly. Factories displayed craft. Famine struck, and always the shadow of British control stretched across daily life, from courts to schools to fields. Gandhi traveled widely to see this for himself. He walked village paths, sat in farmers' huts, listened to laborers and merchants, and heard the same refrain: hardship, burden, and the ache of being ruled by others. He chose to live simply, wearing homespun cloth, eating plain vegetarian meals, walking instead of riding. He wanted no barrier between himself and the people. He spun cotton with his own hands on a charkha, the spinning wheel, and urged others to do the same. For him, spinning was not only work, it was symbol. It said, we can make for ourselves what we need. We can resist by creating. We can fight empire by refusing its cloth. Soon, small actions became great movement. In Champaran, farmers cried out against oppressive indigo plantations. Gandhi went, listened, stayed, and gave them courage to resist. His presence was quiet but steady, like a lamp in a storm. Officials threatened, but Gandhi remained. He was arrested, but people rose to defend him. The farmers won relief, and Gandhi's way of non-violent action gained ground. In Kheda, in Courage, famine struck, and peasants could not pay taxes. Gandhi again stood with them. He urged them not to pay what they could not, but also not to raise a hand in anger. The government pressed, but the people held. In time, relief was granted. Through such struggles, Gandhi taught that justice could be pursued without violence, that patience and unity were stronger than fear. The movement grew larger. The Rowlatt Act, passed by the British, allowed imprisonment without trial. India rose in protest. In Amritsar, peaceful crowds gathered at Jallianwala Bagh only to be fired upon without warning. Hundreds died. The news spread like fire. Gandhi was shaken. He had called for peaceful protest, and the violence of authority had answered with blood. He felt sorrow, yet also a deeper conviction. India must resist, but resist in a way that would not plant more seeds of hatred. He called for non-cooperation. He urged Indians to give up British titles, to boycott British schools, court and cloth. He asked them to spin, to learn, to stand on their own feet. Across India, people followed. Lawyers left courts, students left schools. Officials resigned posts, bonfires of foreign cloth were lit. The British scoffed, but they also trembled. For the first time, an empire felt the weight of millions moving in quiet refusal. Prison became a familiar place. Gandhi was arrested more than once, spending long months behind bars, but prison did not silence him. He wrote, he prayed, he reflected. He came out each time thinner, older, but sharper. People saw not a man weakened, but a man who seemed strengthened by suffering. They called him Mahatma, the great soul. He himself rejected titles, calling himself only a humble servant, but the name stayed. The Salt March became one of his most powerful acts. Salt was taxed, though it was a gift to the sea. Gandhi announced that he would walk from his ashram to the coastal village of Dandi, and there he would make salt from the sea, breaking the law. The march began with a few followers. Each day more joined. Villagers lined the roads, showering flowers, offering water, pressing his hand. The line of marchers stretched longer, step after step, mile after mile. Reporters wrote, cameras clicked, the world watched, an old man walked for justice. At Dandi, he bent, lifted a lamp of salt, and held it high. It was a small act, but it shook an empire. Across India, people made salt, defied the law, filled prisons. The government struck hard, beating peaceful protesters, filling jails, lashing out. But the people did not stop. The salt was more than salt. It was freedom in their hands. Gandhi's leadership was not like others. He did not command armies. He did not promise riches. He asked for discipline, patience, and sacrifice. He asked people to accept beatings without striking back, to go to jail without shame, to weave cloth instead of buying it, to see freedom not only as a gift to receive, but as work to be done daily. Many struggled with this demand. It was hard, it was slow, it was painful, but it was also powerful. Meetings with British officials followed. Gandhi, dressed in simple homespun, sat across tables from men in suit and crowns. His presence itself was a challenge. He spoke calmly, firmly, never raising his voice, but never lowering his demand. Freedom. Some mocked him, some feared him, some admired him, but none could ignore him. Through all this, Gandhi remained deeply human. He grew tired, he fell ill, he quarreled with allies, he doubted himself at times, but he returned always to prayer, to spinning, to simplicity. He said that the means were the ends, that one could not build peace with violence, nor justice with lies. He lived this truth even when it cost him dearly. By the 1930s and 40s, his figure had become a symbol across the world. Leaders from other lands flocked to him, visited him, learned from him. He inspired movement far beyond India's borders. Yet he himself remained rooted in the soil, among villages, in ashrams, with spinning wheels and prayer beads. The power that rose from him came not from thrones, but from hat, from fields, from the faith of ordinary people. As World War II shook the globe, India's demand for independence grew urgent. Gandhi launched the Quit India movement, calling for the British to leave. The empire fought back with arrest, with force, but the tide was turning. The sacrifices of millions, the patience of countless protests, the unyielding spirit of non-violence, these pushed history forward. Through these years, Gandhi's leadership shaped India's path. He wasn't perfect. He had his critics. He made mistakes. But his insistence on truth, on non-violence, on simplicity, gave India a voice the world could not ignore. The boy from Porbandar, once shy and unsure, had become the face of a nation's hope. And yet, he always said, it's not the leader, it's the people. He saw himself as one among millions, spinning, praying, walking, falling, and rising. He believed freedom was not a gift to be handed down, but a discipline to be practiced by all. The journey was far from over. The dream of independence would come, but it would come with sorrow as well as joy. For now, Gandhi stood at the center of history, steady, frail in body but strong in spirit, teaching India to rise without fist, to resist without hate, to win without war. Beyond the marches, the speeches, and the struggles against empire, there was another side of Gandhi that people often remembered most vividly: his daily life. For him, the work of freedom was not only in negotiations and protest, it was also in the rhythm of how one lived each day. He believed that greatness was built from small actions done with care. He lived in ashrams, communities that he established to bring together people who wanted to live simply, honestly, and with service at their center. These ashrams were not palaces. They were clusters of huts, simple and bare. The ground was swept daily, the meals were cooked by the community, and chores were shared equally. Gandhi himself cleaned latrines, washed his own clothes, and ate from the same bowels as everyone else. For him, there was no work too low, no task unworthy. Service was honor, and labor was prayer. His day began early, often before sunrise. He would rise from a thin mattress, bath with cold water, and sit in prayer. The prayers were not long chants of grandeur, but quiet recitations of verses that reminded him of truth and peace. He read from the Bhagavad Gita, from the Bible, from the Quran. For Gandhi, truth was larger than any single book. He saw the wisdom of many faiths as different windows opening the same light. After prayer, he often sat at his spinning wheel. The sharkha was more than a tool, it was a symbol. With each turn, he drew thread from cotton, twisting fiber into strand. He urged others to do the same, to spin their own cloth rather than depend on foreign imports. The wheel said, "We are self-reliant, we are strong, we can create." Gandhi's fingers moved slowly, steadily, and the hum of the wheel became part of the ashram's song. His meals were plain. He ate fruit, vegetables, simple bread, milk when needed, and little else. He avoided excess, believing that food was for the body's service, not for indulgence. He often experimented with diet, trying to find the simplest and purest way to nourish life. He fastened often, not only as protest, but as discipline. Fasting, he said, cleared the mind and drained the will. His fast became a powerful act, moving crowds, pressing government. But at their heart, they were also personal, an expression of self-control. Visitors came from around the world to meet him. They were surprised to find him sitting cross-legged on the floor, wearing only a simple dhoti of homespun cloth, his body thin, his eyes bright but gentle. Kings, presidents, writers, and journalists came. He welcomed them with the same courtesy he gave to villagers and children. He listened more than he spoke, but when he spoke, his words were simple and direct. He did not use decoration, he used clarity. His home was full of activity. Children ran across the courtyards. Goats wandered. The smell of cooking rose from fires. The sound of prayer mixed with the sound of work. Gandhi moved them on among it, all calmly, pausing to answer a question, to a great visitor, to lift a broom. People expected the Mahatma to be distant, but he was present. His greatness was not that he stood above others, but that he stood among them, living the values he spoke. He loved walking, even when frail. He walked miles each day. Walking was his way of thinking, being with the land, of moving at the pace of the people. He walked through villages, through fields, along dusty roads. People followed, people greeted, people pressed forward to touch his feet. But Gandhi kept his stride steady, simple, as though the path itself was his companion. Letters poured in. Some sought advice, some poured out grief, some asked for guidance. Gandhi answered as many as he could, often with brief notes written by hand. He believed in personal touch, in the weight of words carefully chosen. Even in letters, he tried to live truth and kindness. In dispute, whether in villages or in politics, he often acted as mediator. He listened patiently, let both sides speak, then spoke of fairness and conscience. He believed that solutions must be just, not simply quick. He saw that compromise without truth was fragile. His counsel was respected even by those who opposed him. His daily discipline became his teaching. He showed that freedom was not only about throwing off rulers, but about ruling oneself. Simplicity, service, honesty, and patience, these were the true pillars of independence. He asked people to see freedom not as a flag alone, but as a way of living. When India finally approached independence, Gandhi's heart was both full and heavy. The dream of freedom was close, but it was stained with the sorrow of partition. The country was divided into India and Pakistan, and violence erupted between communities that had once lived side by side. Gandhi walked among the riots, unarmed, pleading for peace. He fasted again and again, refusing food until violence ceased. His frail body became a shield, his suffering a plea. Crowds listened. Many laid down their weapons. Some, however, did not. He saw freedom come in 1947, but he also saw the river's blood that ran beside it. He said, "What we want is not the India of my dreams." He had hoped for unity, for brotherhood, for harmony. Instead, he saw hatred break into flames. It pained him deeply, yet he did not give up. Even in his final days, he walked for peace, spoke for love, and prayed for unity. On January 13, 1948, Gandhi walked to a prayer meeting in Delhi. He was frail, supported by others. The crowd parted for him, as it always did. He raised his hands in greeting, and then a man stepped forward and shot him. Gandhi fell, his lips whispering the name of God. His body left the world, but his spirit did not. His message lived on. Truth, non-violence, simplicity. The world mourned. Leaders from every nation paid tribute. Millions wept in India. But more than tears, there was reflection. Gandhi had shown that one man, living simply, refusing violence, holding to truth, could shake an empire and inspire the world. His legacy spread across continent. Martin Luther King in America, Nelson Mandela in South Africa, and many others learned from his way. They saw that resistance need not be armed, that courage could be quiet, that love could disarm hate. Gandhi's life became a beacon beyond India's borders. Today, his spinning wheel is remembered, his words are quoted, his image is carried, but more than symbols, it's his daily example that endures. Rise early, live simply, speak truth, serve others, walk humbly. These were not slogans, but habit, and habit multiplied become history. For Gandhi, greatness was never about power, throne. It was about how one lived the ordinary day. He believed that freedom begins in the heart, that peace begins at the table, that truth begins in the small act of keeping a promise. And so his legacy continues, like the steady hum of the spinning wheel, like the endless breath of the sea. The boy from Propanda became the Mahatma, not by seeking greatness, but by living simply, faithfully each day. In this, his story remains alive, a reminder that change begins with the smallest of steps, taken with courage, taken with love. This was Hypnos. Another story has been told, and now it's time to rest. Good night. And so, as Gandhi's footsteps fade into the vast horizon of time, one truth remains. Greatness does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it walks barefoot. Sometimes it breaks its own heart so that others may rise. He left no palace, no fortune, no throne. but he left a testament, written not on paper, but in the souls of millions, showing that the human spirit, when rooted in truth, becomes unbreakable. His journey reminds us that change does not begin with nations, government, or armies. It begins with a single choice: to stand, to speak, to refuse to surrender the light inside us. If Gandhi taught us anything, it's that the world can be transformed. One act of courage, one act of kindness, one act of truth at a time. Maybe, just maybe, the next chapter of this story belongs to us. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Real Talk Stories, where we bring to life the journeys of souls who dared to dream, to fight, and to change the world. Thank you for watching. Walk gently, walk boldly, and keep the flame of truth alive.